John Zmirak. John, welcome to the program. Lots to talk about today. I know you're in Dallas with the Beagles. We're here in the New York studio. I'm dying to talk to you about your article titled, "The Vatican's Alliance with China, More Evil Than We Thought." A lot of people are not following this. A lot of people are not following anything going on with the Vatican or the Catholic world. This is of huge importance to everybody, certainly every American. Please talk about it.
Sure. Now, remember, Pope Francis is obsessed with politics. Even while Trump was running for president, Pope Francis was issuing specific statements designed to hurt Trump politically. I think they backfired or got ignored, but he was trying. Remember, after Trump announced his proposal for a wall, Pope Francis said, Christians don't build walls, they build bridges. If you want to build walls, you're not a Christian.
Right. That's probably the most dumb generalizing statement ever uttered from the mouth of any pope. I'm just staggered that he made
at that point, but he topped it many times since then. Give the man credit. He's ratcheting up his game.
Yeah.
The most egregious thing I think Pope Francis has done, and therefore any pope has done, literally, really, excuse me, was the deal he cut with the Chinese government. Quick explanation. Since 1949, when Mao Zedong imposed a totalitarian dictatorship on China, Christians have been persecuted. Missionaries have been hunted down, Protestant and Catholic, hunted down, killed, kept in camps. Thousands and thousands of people.
I want to just underscore, people have no idea the horrors that Christians went through during the Cultural Revolution. What the Chinese government did, it is horrifying. Absolutely.
There's a good book,
horrifying.
The Enemy Within, by a former Chinese missionary, Father Raymond de Hager. The Enemy Within. And thankfully, I had an anti-communist teacher in high school who got us to read it and to go see Father de Hager speak before he died.
Oh, man. People need to understand this stuff. Go ahead.
So the Chinese government made no provision for tolerating either Catholics or Protestants, but in order to try to corrupt the Catholic Church, it thought, it set up a fake patriotic church, put that in quotes, which were renegade bishops or bishops who'd broken under torture, who set up their own organization that was entirely run as a Communist Party puppet. Now, the Russian Orthodox Church was subject to this under the Soviets. The Chinese did the same thing with the Roman Catholic Church.
And by the way,
some renegades.
Anybody who's read my Bonhoeffer book knows that this is precisely what the Nazis were trying to do with the quote-unquote German church, trying to remake it along Nazi lines. Bonhoeffer and a few others very heroically stood against that. It was gruesome. Go ahead.
Right. Okay. That fake Catholic Church, that patriotic church, which is a communist sock puppet, Pope Francis made a deal with China saying that Catholics in China should join the sock puppet church and ignore the bishops and priests who for decades have been keeping the church alive underground.
Okay, now I always have to hit pause because what you just said is very hard to believe. In other words, it's so horrific. It's so counterintuitive. Why would the Pope, when I think of the Pope, I think of somebody like John Paul II, a heroic figure who stood bravely, historically, against communist wickedness. Why would Pope Francis do what I consider something that is like a grand betrayal of those who have suffered under communism for their Christian faith? Why would he do this?
Well, there is historical precedent. When Joseph Stalin made his Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler, they made a deal where they threw their supporters under the bus, especially Stalin. He threw all the communists of Western Europe under the bus, the ones who were trying to overthrow the governments in fascist countries like Italy and Germany. He just basically said, let the Gestapo kill them. We don't care. And he told the communists in France and England that they should stop opposing Hitler. They should start denouncing any arming against Hitler as an imperialist warmongering thing. In fact, he had communist unions in France sabotage war production to make the invasion easier for Hitler. And similarly, Hitler did things that supported Stalin.
Well, excuse me, I expect Stalin and Hitler to do these wicked, evil things. But we are talking about
should
the
also
Pope
expect
of the Catholic Church.
Of Francis.
Okay, why then? I don't get it. In other words,
Francis has made it clear that he hates the free market. He hates national sovereignty. He seems to hate Western civilization itself, to see it as a materialistic, evil, power-hungry thing that oppresses the poor in much the same way that Marxists have seen it. And he has said over and over again, he said one of his childhood mentors was a communist newspaper woman. He said that the communists love the poor the way Christians are supposed to, and most Christians don't. The Pope Francis has made it clear he is a left-wing globalist, indistinguishable from George Soros. Members of Soros' group have been invited to speak at the Vatican. So have the pro-abortion Ford Foundation. So has Ban Ki-moon of the UN, Jeffrey Sachs. All these left-wing globalist organizations, Pope Francis has openly allied with them. And there's a lot more detail, okay? But Pope Francis didn't surrender to the Chinese government. He allied with the Chinese government against America, against Trump, against the West and capitalism. He wants a great power ally for the Vatican. He remembers John Paul II had the United States and Britain under Thatcher. He wants a great power ally so he can fight what he sees as the evil capitalist institution that is the United States and populist governments in the West that are trying to control immigration instead of having open borders that let those countries be overwhelmed by poor immigrants who will vote in socialism, which is what Pope Francis wants.
So he's basically Bernie Sanders with a red hat.
No, Bernie Sanders is a centrist patriot compared to Pope Francis. The Pope is George Soros in a white dress, essentially. I mean, he's much more interested in politics than he is in religion. I'm not sure he has any interest in religion. I don't think he believes in God. I think he's someone who found politics, who found the church as a hermit, like a crab of a hermit shell of a hermit crab. He could climb in and use the church as an instrument for what he's really interested in, which is left-wing politics. And there's a lot more to this, Eric,
by the way,
I bet we're coming up on a break.
Red hat. I meant red shoes, since it's the Cardinals that wear the red hats. I got to say, John, we're not hearing a lot about this in the news. This is very dark stuff. And speaking as an evangelical, it sounds like classic end time stuff. I mean, the idea that the head of this billion-plus member Catholic Church would be in bed with George Soros and people who I would see as the enemies, not just of America, but of freedom, the kind of freedom espoused by Reagan and Thatcher and JP2.
And the American founders and Thomas Aquinas and the whole Catholic tradition supports a basic level of freedom. And since Vatican II, the Church has supported religious freedom. Pope Francis has abandoned all these things. Now, I want to show the incredible double standard. Pope Francis has denounced the United States for having the death penalty. He's denounced other Western countries for even having life imprisonment. He said even murderers should not face life imprisonment because it deprives them of hope. Now, hope is a theological virtue that refers to eternal salvation, not the speculations of a convicted murderer as to whether he'll ever get out.
Well, and obviously he's in bed with the Chinese who murder innocent people, who torture them, who kill prisoners and then use their organs, sell their organs, kind of like what Planned Parenthood does with babies.
Let's emphasize that. China makes billions every year killing political prisoners, killing Muslim Uyghurs and Falun Gong members and Christians, killing them to order. When they get an order for a certain kind of kidney or liver or a certain blood type, they find a prisoner who has that, and they kill him. And according to credible press releases I've seen, including Forbes magazine, China often vivisects the people, cuts the organs out of them while they're still alive, because that keeps the organ fresher, and only executes the man afterwards. And
folks,
here is
this is very important. It's dark stuff. Please don't go away. It's the Eric Metaxes Show. John, what you're talking about is so dark, but I want to ask you a question. Who is covering this
very few people?
Other than
Forbes magazine.
Forbes magazine is covering this.
Yeah. The Epoch Times, which is an anti-communist
I would expect
newspaper.
the Epoch Times to cover it. They're heroic, and they're on this Chinese stuff. But in the mainstream media,
no,
even in the conservative
absolutely
media,
not. The Catholic media,
even in the conservative media, I don't see people covering this. And this is absolutely world news. There is no question. When you're talking about China and you're talking about the Vatican, this is world news, what you're telling us. And I'm just astounded.
And there's a little bit more.
Yeah.
Pope Francis has condemned any Westerner who creates weapons. He said, if you make weapons, you can't call yourself a Christian. He was using the UN to try to call for the elimination of private firearms, basically hunting rifles and pistols. That's what the UN declaration he supported would do. It would force the United States to essentially repeal the Second Amendment. Pope Francis came out and defended that and said that Christians can't make weapons. Interestingly, in the same speech, he condemned the Western allies for not bombing the railroads that led to the Nazi death camps. What were they supposed to bomb it with if making weapons itself is evil? Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah.
But he has, you know what he has never condemned? The fact that China is arming faster than Hitler did in the 1930s. And there's a great book that documents that called The Bully of Asia by Stephen Mosher. I don't know if you've ever had him on.
No.
He is the pro-life activist who, when he was a simple grad student in China, he discovered the Chinese forced abortion one-child policy, and he came to the West to try to break the story. China was so outraged, they put pressure on his university, Stanford, to expel him from his PhD program with false charges of antique smuggling in order to try to discredit him. But in fact, everything he said was completely vindicated. Millions of children were forcibly aborted, sometimes in the 9th month, against their mother's will, and millions of girls were cast aside because you could only have 2 children, and the Chinese culture, they really want at least one son to take care of them when they're old.
Yeah, you can
that
only have
one China
child
policy.
in those days. Yeah, only one child. Now,
So get hold of the book Bully of Asia to see that Chinese military expenditures are much faster than Hitler's were in the build-up to World War II, with only one target, the United States. Pope Francis says nothing about this. But let's get back to the real horror, aside from the persecution of Christians, the organ harvesting. The number one person at the Vatican under Pope Francis in terms of talking about politics and Catholic social teaching, you know, how to apply our beliefs in politics, is Bishop Marcelo Sorondo. He's someone Francis handpicked out of obscurity in Argentina. Bishop Sorondo went on a whirlwind tour of China, came back, you know, the way the Soviets used to take intellectuals on tours of Russia.
Yeah.
He came back and said, China lives out Catholic social teaching more than any country on earth, especially the United States.
Except for butchering the unborn against the mother's will. But
he didn't mention any of that.
You know, who's counting?
And so Pope Francis did not correct him. So this is currently the official position of the Vatican under Pope Francis is communist China is the meaning of Catholic social teaching. Put that aside for a second. Bishop Sorondo recently went to China and announced that the Vatican will be abandoning Taiwan, the democratic part of China, which it currently has relations with, and shifting to support Red China, communist China, instead. Here's the quote from Bishop Marcelo Sorondo. It was reported in the Global Times. Quote, Pope Francis has love and confidence in China, and China trusts Pope Francis, unquote.
This is out of a bad end times novel.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because you'd make
Yep.
up this fictional pope, and people say, "Well, there's no such thing. Like that's a made-up, stupid evangelical fundamentalist idea of a Catholic pope." Except this is the pope that we now have at the head of the Catholic Church.
Remember that under Pope Pius XII, who's been demonized in the media, he repeatedly and continually denounced Nazi atrocities. He didn't name the Jews in particular because he said he was afraid it would make things worse for them, but he continually denounced concentration camps, religious persecution, ethnic persecution, even while he was essentially almost a prisoner with Mussolini's troops surrounding the Vatican. They could have arrested him at any time. Hitler kept talking about hanging Pope Pius XII, yet Pope Pius XII continually denounced such evils and even hid 800,000 Jews in Italian monasteries all across the country, according to Jewish sources who said all that when he died. That's what we expect of a pope, not this pope. And Eric, I haven't even gotten to the worst part.
Go ahead.
Bishop Sarando, Pope Francis's deputy, who said that Communist China lives out Catholic social teaching better than America, and that the Vatican's going to endorse Communist China over Taiwan, made this announcement at a conference of Chinese organ harvesters, the very people who steal organs out of Christians and Muslim Uyghurs and Falun Gong and Chinese political prisoners and sell them for billions of dollars. Bishop Marcello Sarando attended this conference as a speaker and talked about how wonderful China was and that the Vatican was going to deepen its alliance with China.
Okay,
I can't make this stuff up. I don't have this kind of imagination.
We're going to continue the conversation.
Please go to stream.org and read the article.
We're going to continue the conversation with John Zmirak. It's the Eric Metaxes Show, metaxestalk.com. John, this is important stuff. Please continue. I know you're going to get to Theodore McCarrick, the cuddler.
Horrible. It would take a whole Netflix series to depict it. This deal making an alliance with communist China against the United States and Western civilization on the part of the Vatican, which I argue at stream.org is an mirror image of the Nazi Soviet Pact, where two totalitarian powers unified against the free West and against Christianity, essentially. This whole deal was negotiated by Theodore McCarrick, who is now in disgrace as an ex-cardinal. The church is keeping him in hiding away from the media. But he was the most powerful Catholic in America for 20 years. He became Archbishop of Washington, D.C., according to George Neumeyer at the American Spectator and other sources. He picked most of the leading bishops in the United States, people like Bishop Cardinal Tobin, Cardinal Farrell, who went from Dallas, is now at the Vatican, Archbishop Cardinal Kupich of Chicago. Those were all his proteges, who people called them his nephews. McCarrick, over the course of 10 years, repeatedly molested a young man, James Grine, whom he had baptized as a baby. He'd baptized him as a baby. When he got to be about 12 years old, McCarrick was friends with the family, started molesting the boy, taking him on trips. We have photographs of them together in swimwear by the pool. Grine has said McCarrick molested him hundreds of times over the years and even shared him with other clerical perverts.
Quick question. Why is McCarrick not in jail? Because people go to jail for that.
Statute of limitations. What's interesting, which is scandalously short, but why is the Vatican still giving him a pension, supporting him, keeping him in a nice, comfortable apartment? Well, McCarrick is the guy who negotiated this deal with Communist China on behalf of the Vatican.
Okay, let's remind our listeners who go to Catholic Church, do not give a penny to the Catholic Church unless, John, tell our listeners what to do, because the idea that you're giving to an administration that is rewarding Theodore McCarrick is horrible.
Well, here's what I would say, Eric. If your local pastor is a good and faithful man, as thousands of priests are, you want to support him, but you don't want the money going to the bishop.
Correct.
You can fix that.
Correct.
Just give him cash. Hand the priest a wad of cash every 3 or 4 months, every month, whatever. Go hand it to him. There won't be any accounting for it. He won't necessarily report it to the bishop, and he can use it to keep the soup kitchen and the pro-life group and the Eucharist and everything else that his little local church does to keep all that going without it going to the bishops who were picked by Theodore McCarrick, who is a known, proven child molester, and now the Vatican is keeping reporters away from him. They keep him at They were keeping him in a monastery. Now they have him at a parish not far away from a school. So if he were legally a sex offender, he couldn't even be there. In order to keep him away from reporters, because here's one more thing that was reported in First Things: when McCarrick was still at the apex of power, he was on the board of something called the Papal Foundation. That was a group of well-meaning American Catholic laymen who wanted to support the Vatican's mission of evangelization. McCarrick was ordered by the Vatican to shake these men down for $20 million in order to bail out a corrupt, bankrupt Catholic hospital in Rome that it appears to have mob ties, so that's where the money went. This black hole of a hospital that's bankrupt. It's an ophthalmology hospital. I don't know why we need special Catholic hospitals for the eyes. We don't have particular Catholic ethical teachings that are distinctive about what to do with the human eye. So it sounds like a corrupt boondoggle to me. But according to First Things, $20 million was taken from that. These laymen gave in to the cardinal. They're afraid of the red hat, and used to pay off the debts of this corrupt, bankrupt boondoggle hospital in Rome. Now, reporters should be interviewing him about that, asking him where the money went, who told him to do it. They are being kept away because he is locked away in comfortable retirement with a pension after being a serial child molester. That's how Pope Francis rolls. Anyone who tells you Pope Francis is a reformer or that the church was pharisaical before him and he's opening it up to be free and tolerant, nonsense. Pope Francis is a leftist activist who is using the Catholic Church as a tool to promote his own politics. So, by the way, one more thing. Peter's Pence is something once a year Catholics are asked to put money in the basket that goes directly to the Vatican. Do you know what they used Peter's Pence for last year? To fund the sexually explicit gay biopic of Elton John called Rocket Man.
You've got to be kidding.
I'm not kidding. This has all been reported in the mainstream media. Even the mainstream media had to report this.
Church want to support any movie, much less Elton John's biopic Rocket Man? I'm just baffled. Why would they do that?
I don't know. They also did risky speculation on the London real estate market. They basically treated the money like it was their money for Las Vegas. And they lost a lot of it because they made bad investments because they're priests and they're not supposed to be financial specialists. The Vatican Bank, for decades actually, has been scandalously corrupt. And Pope John Paul tried to clean it up and failed. Pope Benedict was trying to clean up this entire mess, and his effort to do so led him to despair and resign from his office. And in fact, there's another story breaking that I haven't even written about yet. Pope Benedict collaborated with Cardinal Sarah, and a conservative African cardinal, very solid guy, to do a book defending the Catholic custom of priestly celibacy, of priests not getting married. And that book came out was announced a couple of days ago. The Vatican put enormous pressure on former Pope Benedict, who is basically living, he's almost a prisoner of the Vatican.
Hang on, John. I'm going to cut you off in that sentence. We're going to a hard break. We'll be right back with more John Zmirak.
Yeah.
Okay, but we're talking to John Zmirak. John, we just have minutes left. You were in the middle of an important sentence, an important point.
The former Pope Benedict co-wrote a book with Cardinal Sarah defending the celibacy of the Catholic clergy. Enormous pressure in the Catholic world was put on former Pope Benedict, who was essentially living almost as a prisoner of Pope Francis. He really can't leave. And 2 days later, Pope Benedict's secretary, George Gonswine, wrote Cardinal Sarah saying, take his name off the book. So now the book's going to have to be pulped. Thousands of copies have already been printed, and it's going to have to take Pope Benedict's name off because Pope Francis apparently didn't like it and thought it was disloyal of Pope Benedict to speak out in defense of a 2,000-year-old Catholic custom. Whether or not you support clerical celibacy, that's not irrelevant. What this shows me is that Pope Benedict is not a free agent. He's not able to do what he wants. I really think the Italian police should remove him from the Vatican and make sure that he wants to still be there, because I don't think he's there of his own free will. And I wonder if he resigned of his own free will, or if future historians are going to find out that he was coerced or threatened or somehow cajoled into resigning. And if that happens, then Pope Francis's whole term in office will be regarded as an anti-pope, and there'll be an asterisk next to his name in history books. This kind of thing happened in the Middle Ages occasionally, happened in the Renaissance. There is a track record
the Catholic
for evil
Church
men
needs,
grabbing hold of the office of the Pope.
The Catholic Church needs a Luther for today, and I nominate
I don't know that Luther
John
would help.
Zmirak.
We know what we need?
What?
We need someone like the Emperor Otto the Great. Back in the 10th century, the Vatican had been captured by a faction of Italian nobility led by a prostitute. Her name was Mazovia. Historians call this period in the Vatican church history the pornocracy, the reign of prostitutes, and the Holy Roman Emperor Otto now called Otto the Great, marched into Rome and deposed the corrupt pope and held a free election to bring a decent, real pope who represented the church rather than corrupt political factions. And it was called the Ottonian Renaissance. So what we need is an Otto the Great.
Well, if we don't get an Otto the Great, I think we need another Luther, because honestly, Luther did not want to break up the church, as you know. Pope Leo, handled things about as badly as he could. But somebody to speak up as you are doing, so that faithful Catholics, we live in a different world, we have mass media, can be awakened to what is happening, to where their money is going, not so that they'll leave the church, but so that they will reform the church from within, because this is despicable. I feel privileged on this program to be able to get this news out thanks to you, John Zmirak. I hope people will go to stream.org. If you follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, I will put this out there. Very, very important stuff. John Zmirak, we're out of time today.
Thanks so much, Eric. I really appreciate the time to talk about this.
God bless you. Thank you, my friend. Folks, that's the end of the show. In hour 2 today,
we got Max
we're going to be talking to Max McLean, talking about theater.
Yeah.
And there's something happening tomorrow night, a premiere.
That's right.
Tomorrow night here in New York City of his new show, Paradise Lost. I'm going to it. I have decided. Yeah. Anyway, we'll talk to Max McLean.
And he said if I bring my own chair, I could come too.
Oh, terrific. And you know what? In hour 2, I'm going to finish the duck hunting story. So don't go away. We'll be right back.